Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's Anne-Marie, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of the 2024 Gathering of Kindness. Kindness is my superpower. This week, we take time to take a breath, to reconnect to our purpose, and continue a vital and important conversation that is at the heart of our gatherings, kindness. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the many lands from which we gather today. I'm joining you this morning from the beautiful lands of the Camaragal people of the great Eora Nation and extend my deepest respect to their elders past and present. This land has always been a place of gathering, learning and healing, a place where kindness, compassion and empathy have long been practiced. As we come together today, let us remember that it is and always will be Aboriginal land. A very warm welcome to all consumers, carers and community members joining us today. Your lived experiences and insights brings a depth and wisdom that is truly invaluable in shaping a better, more compassionate health system for all of us. If this is your first gathering, then we feel very privileged to have you join us, and I hope it's the start of many more. Thank you for being here and for sharing your powerful stories with us. Well, what an extraordinary start to the Gathering of Kindness. Yesterday really set the scene for a week filled with inspiration, empathy, empowerment, with Namo hosting the opening. It was a brilliant showcase of what dedicated and compassionate nurses and midwives from Southeastern Sydney Local Health District can achieve when they come together. They so beautifully illustrated the commitment to not only upholding excellence, but continuing to strive to move the dial from great to exceptional. The ripple effect of their words and the values that they hold so deeply will undoubtedly carry through each day of this week and far beyond. And for all the nurses and midwives who are joining us on the call today, thank you for everything that you do. Also, a very special thanks to Fiona, a remarkable consumer leader, for her extraordinary insights yesterday. The simplicity and strength of her messages resonated deeply with many, reminding us of the essential, sometimes small yet powerful actions that make a real difference in people's lives. And Fiona said, kindness is a lifeline in a very stressful situation. Kindness builds trust and therefore connection. And I think this sentiment was no better demonstrated than an extraordinary video featuring Irene, a brave and courageous mum from Nepean Blue Mountains, her beautiful family, Brendan, Jira and Naraya, and Mithra, her midwife, who supported Irene through some really dark and tough times. A touching and moving story. And look out for sweet little Jira wearing his superpower cape. He's just adorable. And then at lunchtime, we were able to participate in a wonderful session hosted by our partners, Hush. And it was called Structural Kindness, Working Smarter, Not Harder, where we were joined by some of Australia's leading experts in human factors, resilience and healthcare leadership. And we explored how we can embed kindness into our healthcare organisations and embrace the term radical compassion. They certainly set the bar high for the rest of the gathering, and we're so grateful to have had such a remarkable group open the doors to these meaningful conversations. No pressure, Nicki and team. And so today we continue this journey with another thought-provoking session, and we take it global with our esteemed panel zooming in from New Zealand, the USA and Melbourne. And together they will explore a question at the heart of kind and compassionate care. Is kindness really a superpower? If you're a GOC groupie, Gathering of Kindness groupie, you may remember the great debate from last year's Gathering of Kindness. it wasn't really a debate. It was probably more of an uplifting and hilarious conversation at times, as I couldn't find anyone to take the negative around is kindness soft and fluffy. One of the team's captains was the wonderful Nicki Macklin, not only a dear friend, but a passionate supporter of elevating the human experience and New South Wales health. Nicki has just recently submitted her PhD thesis on exploring kindness in healthcare teams and what conditional kindness can look and feel like, and how we can cultivate kindness in our teams with our patients, families, and communities to flourish. And a huge congratulations from all of us, Nicki. I know how much love, sweat, and tears has gone into the preparation of your thesis. I'll let Nicki share her own origin story, but it's safe to say she brings a wealth of personal experience to this work. After spending over a decade navigating the healthcare system as a mother to a child with complex medical needs, she has seen firsthand how transformative kindness can be for everyone involved. Nicki holds several advocacy and advisory roles in the consumer space and is deeply passionate about creating spaces where others can share their voices. And that's through co-production and fostering open-hearted organisational cultures, and she champions inclusivity and empowerment. And with that, I'll hand over to Nicki to lead this brilliant conversation. Thanks, Nicki.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Anne-Marie. Somewhat aspirational. I don't handle my thesis for another 4 weeks, but I really appreciate you cheering me on in the background. Anne-Marie, I've been reflecting lately on how inspirational you are to a great many people. Your energy for all things kindness really is your own superpower. Thank you for all that you do for all of us here today. And thank you for creating space to enjoy this special event and discussion. It's a huge pleasure and a privilege to be back today following last year's great conversation, to continue as the panel facilitator for the Great Conversation version 2. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest to you all today. Emma G is an occupational therapist, a professional speaker, and a person with lived experience of disability. In a moment, Emma's life changed from that of a professional health provider and long-distance runner to that of a person who has survived a stroke at the age of 24. 19 years on, Emma now runs a lived experience consultancy business aiming to increase person-centered care and resilience, raise disability awareness, and share her insights of life as a therapist and a patient to demonstrate that anything is possible. Emma's published a book, Reinventing Emma, which can be purchased at a discounted rate via Emma's website. She also works as a lived experience advisor at the Summer Foundation. Our second guest today is Rich Frankel. Rich is a dear friend to me and to many. He is also a professor of medicine and geriatrics at Indiana University School of Medicine. He's a senior scientist at the, Rich, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Regenstrief Institute. He currently directs the Advanced Scholars Program for internists in research and education. Rich is a qualitative health services researcher whose interests include face-to-face communication and its effects on quality, safety, and outcomes of care. More recently, he's been using approaches from positive social sciences to change the culture of academic health sciences centres. He's been a medical educator for the past 40 years and served as the co-program director in the internal medicine residency program at Highland Hospital and the University of Rochester. He's also published more than 300 research papers in the area of physician-patient communication and organisational change. Sure. 2 amazing guests. So something that we have been discussing in our team meetings to prepare for this event is how our combined experiences all of us having experienced major events on the other side of the bed rails, how those experiences show that the vast impact that small acts of kindness can make in moments where we find ourselves at our most vulnerable. When we feel seen, noticed, and cared for by those beautiful souls that we are relying on to provide our care, this makes us feel better. Some might argue that this sort of kindness also has the potential to help make us better. Rich and Emma, on that note, let's dive into our first question. I'd like to ask you both to share one example where kindness really impacted on your care or experience. Rich, I'm going to throw it to you first.
Thank you, Nicki, and thank you for the introduction. So this is a photograph that was taken about 3 weeks before I had what was going to be 3 heart attacks in 18 months. And I had been awarded an honor by the Gold Foundation for creating a loving community. But what does that actually mean, and how does it relate to small acts of kindness? So if we could have the next slide. So on September 15th of 2021, my wife and I were in our living room putting together a weaving loom for me. She already has a loom. And I started to have chest discomfort. Now I would say I was starting to have chest pain. And to make a long story short, my wife, Michelle, called 911 and I was transported, this was during COVID, to a small community hospital, which is part of Indiana University's system, but a hospital that I'd not heard of or been in the 20 years that I have been at the medical school. And the 911 crew took me into the emergency room. It was a Thursday evening, and the nurse took my vitals and put us in this triage room. And unlike the room that you saw in the slide that says that kindness works here, where there's a picture that is appropriate for a young person, this room is pretty cold and pretty stark, and it is pretty much devoid of anything that feels kind and feels humane. Well, my chest pain was getting worse, and we were sitting there waiting for the emergency physician to come in. And into the room walked a diminutive person, about 5'3", who introduced herself as Dr. D. And she said, "Everyone calls me Dr. D because nobody can pronounce my name, which is Dashini Moonsingh." And she said, "We're not exactly sure of what's going on, but we think you may be having a heart attack. And we're going to do some tests, which will tell us positively one way or the other." And then she turned to me and she said, "I know all about you." This is somebody that I'd never met in my entire life, a total stranger. So you can imagine my surprise when this person said, "I know all about you." She said, "I read your internist notes." And then she said, "How's the book on exam room computing that you've been writing?" And I nearly fell off the examining table. I said, "Well, we just spent 6 months in France on sabbatical, and we decided to enjoy France and put the book on hold for the moment." Well, over the next hour, it became clear that I was having a heart attack. And Dr. D stayed with us, got to know us, spoke with my wife, Michelle, asked her what she does for a living, what her interests are, further asked me similar questions. And then the test results came in, and indeed I was having a heart attack. So I was wheeled up to the floor, Dr. D following, and she spent another 45 minutes. It was a slow night in the emergency department. And it was really just to get to know us as people. And it was really, it had a really remarkable impact in terms of feeling cared for, feeling known, and feeling as though I was in good and trustworthy hands. Well, the next morning, it turns out this 32-bed hospital had a catheterization lab, which was fully equipped. And the cardiologist wasn't coming in until 8 in the morning, and Dr. D's shift ended at 7 o'clock in the morning. But she waited the extra hour to do what we call a warm handoff, which is to say not only what the record states, but who the person is, what they might be anxious about, so forth and so on. And from that point on, till 6 weeks ago when Dr. D and I had breakfast together, we've stayed in pretty much constant communication because it turns out she's a communication coach and we have a lot of things in common. So I am just so grateful to have had someone caring enough to turn that triage room into a safe place, a welcoming place, and a place where the human spirit can live.
Thank you, Rich. That's a really powerful story. I love that you've stayed in contact with Dr. D, and it talks to the power of the connection in that moment, the kind of long-lasting impact that that's had. So that's, yeah, thank you very much for sharing. Emma, I'm going to throw the same question to you now. Feel free to take your time and share your experience with us.
Thanks, Nicki, and thank you, Rich. That was so powerful. Yeah, since my stroke now 19 years ago, there have been multiple examples I could draw on that show the power of kindness. And it is really quite often when I'm feeling quite engulfed by a really challenging moment in time and feeling really vulnerable, and it's actually human kindness, I think, at those times that get me through. But in saying that, I think I really want to share one experience which you could see on the slide of a diagnostic procedure that I had recently. And although I've had thousands of scans and jabs and procedure throughout the last 19 years, I am always absolutely petrified each single time I have to have another procedure. And so a few months ago, I was diagnosed randomly with meningitis, and I was required to have another MRI. And I was completely terrified. And to add to this fear, to treat my facial palsy and help my right eye close, they've sewed in a gold weight into my right eyelid so I can blink. And so I was especially anxious knowing that gold is conductor and I could not remove it from my eye. So I'm really freaking out. And so a week into my admission, thinking I dodged another day of not having this MRI, I was in my pajamas at the end of the day, basically dreading my upcoming Clexane injection and my hospital early meal. And suddenly this porter comes in unexpectedly with a wheelchair, and he enters my room and he takes me down to the hospital basement for my impromptu MRI. And although I was really keen to know why I had meningitis, I really remembering feeling not only really totally sleep deprived and bombarded with medication, and really vulnerable, but absolutely terrified and being so over being poked and prodded and just wanting my family. Really craving that familiarity and having some comfort. But on this occasion, instead of that cold unfamiliarity that I had expected and I'd almost conjured up in my mind, the radiologist that greeted me in the basement in there to have this MRI greeted me with a warm blanket and introduced himself really calmly, and he went to really explain in a really calm tone the whole procedure. And there were so many things in his manner that had automatically really calmed me down. And probably like Rich alluded to, he obviously had read my history, saying things like, I see in your notes that you've had a few of these, pointing to that big machine. And then he said, and I know that you have a gold weight in your right eye, don't you? So he was sort of confirming that. And at the same time, he was sort of circling the gold ring on his finger. And then he said to me, I bet that's not too comforting, but try not to worry because I'm wearing this gold ring and my wife would kill me if I took it off. So I'm going to leave it on. And he put it back on, and then he wheeled me into the room and helped the porter transfer me and put a pillow under my knees and the blanket on me. And then throughout that procedure, he continually reassured me over that 60 minutes to see if I was okay. And it was incredible how his actions and his words really calmed me down so much. And I think of so many times, even when I think back to when I first was diagnosed with my arterious venous malformation in my brain 19 years ago. And the neurosurgeon similarly had a really calm manner in the way that he delivered that news to me. And it had such a amazing impact on me despite it was such a traumatic time for me, that touch of kindness made such an incredible impact on my experience. So I think that there's many, but that's what I would share, Nicki.
Thank you so much, Emma. I really, your story really resonates with me and our own family experience in terms of, these gestures and actions. They're small, and your gentleman in the MRI, they didn't necessarily take a lot of extra time. It's about personalizing those minutes spent together and seeking to make not big connections and deep connections, but seeking to notice one another. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. One thing I often reflect on, and I wonder if it's the same for you both, we've all been healthcare professionals at one stage or another. And like most of us, when we choose to become a healthcare professional, we often choose that path out of kind of this inherent sense of kindness and wanting to help other people through their times of vulnerability. I reflected often once our family became entrenched in the healthcare system with our daughter with complex needs. I often reflected back on my own practice as a healthcare professional and wondered how I could have shown even more kindness to my patients, having had the experience now of being vulnerable. But also, a lot of my reflections have been around understanding that it's not always individual choice in terms of how kind or otherwise we can be. And it's really important to acknowledge the impact of the system, the teams that we work in, the work organisation in terms of workload and time pressures. These things do have an impact on how kind we can be. Also, in terms of the two-way flow of kindness, I think as healthcare professionals, we get a lot of messaging around, be kind to your patients. And there are lots of ways you can show kindness, and anyone can show kindness, and just be kind. We also need to place some expectations on our patients and families that they will show kindness back to us. And I know that's kind of an issue that is very current today. A lot of our healthcare workers are not seeing a lot of kindness in return. And I just wanted to raise that as something that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about kindness, and how we create space for kindness. So that leads us on to the next question. This time I'm going to ask you, Emma, to share first. Thinking about either your role as a patient or thinking back on your own healthcare professional experiences, how do we create space for kindness in our interactions with others? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think, Nicki, there are things definitely I think are so powerful and simple that we could do to make space for that. I do think it's vital that we prioritize kindness in each encounter. If we want to build a good relationship, rapport with each person, whether it's a colleague or a patient or a family member, it can be something so simple, but I think should be prioritized. I think it's important to note that we all have the superpower to be kind, and also a choice on whether we want to use it or not. And so I think prioritizing and making space for it to be kind can make such a difference. And I think Rich and I have sort of shown that it does significantly shape your experiences. I think ensuring that you have time to spend with each person, and if need be, make another appointment or time, or acknowledge that that is the case. It is only then that I think a person in their vulnerable state and victim mentality won't take your actions or behaviour personally, and you end up damaging that rapport or that relationship that you have built with them. I recently had a therapist carry out an assessment with me that she was in a rush and wanted to complete quickly. And I remember she marched into my room and didn't sit down. And at times in our brief encounter, I think she seemed quite bored, and I couldn't hear her properly. And she seemed to only get frustrated when I struggled to quickly articulate my responses. And I remember just feeling so gutted from the encounter and so disempowered. But in comparison, I remember later on in my mission, a nurse came into my room, asked if I had time to chat, and then went on and asked if I wanted the blinds down to help my vision, and which side would be better for my hearing to sit on. And already in that conversation, her her kind and thoughtful acts made such difference and made me feel so valued. So I think in choosing, I think it's, I'm rambling on here a bit, but I think in choosing to make space, it is really important to factor in how you can also make space to be kind for others, not just the survivor of the person going through that. It has been so important in my experience when those in my support team are also receiving kindness, whether it's bringing my mum a hot cup of tea or my friend a chair from my visitor chair. But it's incredible when these kind of acts that I can't do are carried out on my behalf. I feel a less of a burden. I guess acts where they feel nurtured too, and it takes a little worry off me that they will stick around as a main recipient of their care. I've taken a few notes here, Nicki, so I'll just keep rambling quickly.
You're
But
not
I
rambling, and
was
please take your time.
I was thinking about also that Mark Twain also says kindness is a language that the deaf can see and the deaf can hear and the blind can see. And I think that also highlights how powerful kindness can be in communicated in our interactions and connections with others. And as you said, Nicki, many people might have little extra time to do an additional task like make a cup of tea. But I think it's really important to remember your other attending skills, not just your verbal skills, how your body language and what you do in each encounter to show kindness. I know for me, early in my recovery, a doctor who I had a lot of respect for overlooked my eye contact when I wanted to get his attention, and I could not talk, I couldn't move, but I could give eye contact, and he ignored that because he was too busy. And I was trying to get his attention, and I remember feeling so gutted and devalued by his manner. And if he'd said to me, I'll see you tomorrow, or I'm too busy, that would have been fine. But just the way that he's kept walking and then ignored the communication I could do, it negated all the rapport and respect I had for him. So I think it's really important to remember that it can be so simple. It can be embedded in your everyday conversations just by the way you speak or give eye contact. And I think the last thing I was going to say, Nicki, is that really what you mentioned before about it has to be reciprocated, and sometimes we as health professionals feel quite berated by someone, and it's hard to be kind to them in that circumstance. And I think often when we do interact with a difficult person, whether it's a colleague or a patient, we do feel so berated, and making space for kindness is definitely not something I think we want to prioritize. But I think, from a recipient of care, I think when you're in a really vulnerable state, it is something that's hard to conjure up. You unfortunately do cop it. And I think it's really important to be mindful of that sometimes you need to give kindness to ease their state and get it reciprocated. If I receive kindness or a kind act, I know that I'm more likely to reciprocate that. So that's my rambly response, Nicki. Hope it made kind of sense. What are your thoughts, Rich?
Well, first of all, Emma, thank you so much for that response to the question. And I agree with all of the points that you made, that it doesn't have to be something overly dramatic, as long as you, as a healthcare consumer, recognize and read the situation in a way that moves the conversation forward. If you ask yourself, well, what do I want out of this conversation? And the answer is, I want to be cared for. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. And somebody is acting very officious, or they're acting as though they don't have the time. Being short with them is unlikely to get you to the point that you're hoping for. So I think one of the things to recognize, and I say this from having spent 40 years on both sides of the bed rail, physicians and a lot of healthcare professionals are not taught any of the communication skills for what to do when they themselves are under pressure. If you compare that with airline pilots go through simulation training so that if it's a serious condition, they know how to act. But I think healthcare professions are far behind in terms of teaching those skills. So personally, after each of my heart attacks, I asked myself, since I was shown such great kindness by Dr. D, what kindness could I show to the healthcare professionals who were caring for me? And one of the things that I had learned from a close colleague is that when you're interviewing patients, the best first question you can ask a patient is, tell me about yourself. And so I decided that I was going to ask that. I was going to start my interactions with the healthcare professionals by asking them as professionals, tell me about yourself. So I'll tell you two quick stories. One, I was in the ICU after my second heart attack in Sarasota, Florida. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and a young nurse came in to take my vitals. And she introduced herself, and I said, tell me about yourself. And she said, well, I grew up in Maine, and I just finished nursing school, and I came down to Florida because I could earn 3 times what I was going to earn in Maine. And I noticed under her tricep that she had a tattoo. So I said, well, tell me about your ink. Tell me about your tattoo. And she looked at me and she said, that was the last sentence that my boyfriend wrote to me before he died. And I said, what was the sentence? And she said, I will love you forever. And we locked eyes at 4 o'clock in the morning. She didn't need me to take care of her, but she did make a deep connection that will last for a lifetime. I'll probably never see her again, but it was something that I could do to reach out to her. The second story was after my third heart attack, also in Florida. I had been rushed into the cath lab, and they had given me a sedative, and the cardiologist said, I want you to count backwards from 100, and I think I got to 97 before I was asleep. The next morning, he came in, reintroduced himself, and he said, do you remember anything about our conversation in the cath lab? And I said, no, you probably gave me medication that would induce amnesia. And he said, oh, yeah, that's right. He said, "So you don't remember asking me not once, but twice to tell you something about myself?" And I said, no time like the present. And so he spent the next 10 minutes telling me about his journey. He's a first generation Indian from the subcontinent. And he went into great detail. And at the end, he looked at me and he said, "You know, in my entire medical career, no one has ever asked me to say something about myself. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity." And so again, what can we do as patients? We can create the space to help people who are under a great deal of stress, maybe for a moment feel a little bit less stressed, maybe for a moment feel like, oh, this is another human being and I can make a connection with this person. And the kindness shown to me is really its own reward. It's not that you get something from it, it's you're giving something and the other person is receiving something. So that's my perspective in terms of what we as patients can do. If you don't like the way things are going, change the environment, act upon the environment, and be your own advocate.
Thank you so much, Rich and Emma. I could listen to you both for a lot longer than we have allowed time for. Those connections, again, are coming through. It's all about human connection, isn't it? Taking those little moments to notice and care for one another, either as patients or as healthcare professionals, and importantly, also inside our healthcare teams. I was reflecting when I was listening to you both, also that it doesn't require us to be perfect all of the time. No one can be kind all of the time. That's unrealistic and unsustainable. But I'm not sure, I don't know, sometimes I think as clinicians, we think that's what's required of us, a perfect score. So I'd just like to share quickly a story of my own father's journey in that regard. So Dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer a number of years ago now, coming up on 10. He was allocated an oncologist through the public system. He wasn't a big fan of this oncologist. They sort of got through 3 different meetings with this oncologist, and Dad was not impressed. Like, this lady was so businesslike. She looked at her computer the whole time. She was in and out. She didn't seem to have time for questions. Dad told this story about on that 3rd appointment, they had such low expectations of what this doctor was going to be like. And true to form, she bustled in a hurry, carrying a million files under her arm, put them down on the desk, got in front of her computer, and she said to Dad, "Well, the good news is you don't have ovarian cancer." And Dad was like, "Well, that's lucky. I'm very relieved about that. Any update on my bowel cancer?" And they looked at each other across that desk in that moment, and they shared a laugh. Laughter about this oncologist, not noticing that Dad is a man in front of her and getting the patient details wrong. But they laughed about it. And in that moment, a connection was forged. And everything turned at that point. So by the time that Dad passed out of this lady's care and into palliative, he was really fond of her. He looked forward to the meetings. And again, for her, there was something special about Dad that she seemed to enjoy. And all it took was a moment of connection. So that's my story to add to the mix. I'm looking at the time, and though I wish that we could just go all morning, we can't. So I have a final question for you, Rich and Emma. But first, I'm going to throw this out to the audience. We're challenging you with a call to action. we'd like you to, on a piece of paper or written in the notes in your phone, write down one action that you would choose today or tomorrow to bring more kindness into your interactions with others. Share this with the person sitting next to you or with a buddy. Agree with each other to check in at the end of tomorrow to see whether you could complete this challenge and reflect on how it went. And while you were thinking about that, this is now the perfect time to ask for your key take-home messages, Rich and Emma. Rich, I'll invite you to answer first, and then I'm going to throw it to you, Emma.
What a great question. First of all, I think that having in mind a specific type of communication or a specific action that you're going to take in the next 24 or 48 hours is really helpful. And then having a buddy, having somebody that you can be responsible to is one good way of ensuring that you'll do the activity. For me, I think, and this is another area where healthcare professionals really need help, and it's in learning what a genuine apology is. And you said it yourself, Nicki, none of us is perfect. We make mistakes. We are an error-prone profession or set of professions. And pretending as though we don't make mistakes or giving what's known as a non-apology apology. If your feelings were hurt, I'm sorry, is the classic non-apology apology because it doesn't take responsibility for what happened. And learning to do genuine apologies is like other communication skills, something that can be taught, learned, and put into practice. And we know from studies in the US, for example, that when a medical error occurs, if a genuine apology follows the error, if the person takes responsibility and acts to learn from it, that the risk of malpractice actually goes down substantially. But more than that is the potential for nurturing the relationship. When you talk to people who have brought malpractice suits, what they want most is an apology. They're not so interested in money changing hands or in anything like that, but it's more the apology. So I think teaching our young professionals and some of our older healthcare professionals how to do apologies genuinely, what I would recommend.
I love that, Rich. I really like that you've tied that into, I guess, and genuine apologies, showing vulnerability, and I guess in a sense embracing our fallibility as human beings and being accountable for that also. Yeah. Thank you, Rich. And Emma, now to you.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Rich said, but I also think my call to action would be to really make space and prioritize these, and not necessarily just I think before we make space and prioritize it, to be aware of your everyday actions and behaviors, and think, is that the impact of that? Just being mindful of that. It said that kindness is free, and so sprinkle it everywhere. And so I think it is making it habitual by asking yourself before each intervention or reflecting on how you are, how can I sprinkle kindness? And I think, it's only then when we're aware of our own behaviours that we can start acting on that.
Thank you. I'm afraid that our session is drawing to an end. Rich and Emma, I really thank you for the open-heartedness that you have shown to the audience and talking about your experiences. It can be hard when we're asked to do this, to show that vulnerability to people that we haven't yet met, or people we don't know well. But storytelling in itself, when we talk about superpower, storytelling is a superpower. It helps us to build empathy and to reflect on our own practice and how our actions truly impact on others. So, time to wrap up. When we're talking about kindness as a superpower, I think this is food for thought. Is it a superpower? Yes, I think kindness is a superpower. But do we have to be specially gifted to be kind? No, I don't think so. It's worth remembering, and as Emma and Rich have shown us with their stories, that little acts of kindness, such as using someone's name, holding their hand while the needle goes in, bringing them a warm blanket, as Emma described, these are little things that take tiny amounts of time, but they have a disproportionate impact on another when they are having a tough time. With our teammates, kindness is also shown in small acts. It's worth thinking about how we treat each other. Small acts like checking in after a difficult encounter with a patient, offering a cup of tea to someone who looks like they've had a long or hard shift, asking another workmate how their evening was last night, or checking in to see how their kids or grandkids are getting along. These actions can make all the difference to how we experience inclusion and belonging at work, how much joy we find in work, but they also set the bar for group norms. And this is what Emma's talking about in terms of making kindness a habit. Being part of a team where we care about each other and we want each other to do well. And we will support each other in this endeavour. Because while it might be a superpower, wouldn't it be so great for kindness to be baked into our workplaces to such an extent that it is also seen as normal and expected by all? Thank you very much, Rich and Emma, for sharing this hour with us, sharing your hearts and your wisdom. I'm very sad to be calling this meeting to an end, but it is time to say our thank yous and our goodbyes. And to hand the session back over to Maddie. Thank you all for coming and being with us.
Thank you, Nicki, and thank you, Rich and Emma. That was just amazing, and I hope that you all have a few moments to reflect back through the chat. There is just so much gratitude to the three of you for sharing your stories so openly and beautifully. It's really connected many of us right now. There is one question in the chat which perhaps Rich, Emma and Nicki, you might like to answer, which is around, perhaps just maybe write something in the chat, and I'd actually extend this to everybody online to share an example of how you in your personal life or health professional lives show and practice kindness to yourself. As they say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So I think it'd be really valuable if everybody was able to share that, an idea that they do every day. One of the things that I love about the Gathering of Kindness is how I get to hear from people who I feel are so much smarter than myself. And I have these moments of connection between one great mind, or in today's case, three great minds, to the words of other great minds. And this week, we've had a conversation about the importance of the small acts, the importance of role modeling kindness in our personal and professional world. And this connected me to the words by Michelle Obama, where life is about practice. And we are practicing who we are every day, and we need to practice who we want to be. It is not lost on me that the days some people experience in New South Wales Health, and of course across the world in any healthcare system, are their hardest, whether they are providing the care or receiving the care. The push and pull of competing agendas and workplace pressures to do the job in the kind and compassionate way, to meet people where they are at, deeply listening within the gift of time. Yesterday, when I was reminded of the words of my very good friend Michelle Obama, another great American, I made the commitment to mindfully practice kindness. So that is my action this week, and I share it with all of you, that I am mindfully practicing kindness, as despite the push and pull, that is the person that I want to be. I do look forward to seeing everyone continue to join these important conversations for the remainder of the week. We'll share the registration link in the chat and the QR code, which will be on the next slide. Certainly reading through some of the comments in the chat, the value that people feel in these conversations is just really, really strong. So I would really encourage everybody to continue to join the remaining sessions, but also maybe bring a friend or a colleague. Today at 12:30, the Hush Foundation brings you the Knowledge Gene, where you'll explore how knowledge can empower better communication, creativity, and collaboration in your clinical work and personal wellbeing. Tomorrow, I'm really excited. It's World Kindness Day, but also the New South Wales Health Secretary, Susan Pearce, will sit down with Associate Professor Rebecca Deans, and they're going to have a conversation about kindness and innovation, how lives have been transformed with uterus transfer. From the emotional isolation faced by patients to the ethical considerations involved. It's not just about the medical breakthrough, but the profound human stories behind it. It is also the launch of the newly updated Health and the Arts framework tomorrow. So for those available and local at St Leonard's, the framework will be launched by the Secretary, and there is also an interactive cake making art workshop with artist Dennis Golding and Artery. And on Thursday, the New South Wales Health Gathering of Kindness, we will join, we'll recap on the 2023 launch of Kind Lab while shining a spotlight on the Kind Side podcast. Before you head off today, we do ask that you spend a few moments completing this brief evaluation. If you're joining us for remaining events of the week, feel free to hold off until the end of the week to share your feedback. The link is being shared into the chat. You can also use the QR code and your personal device. But on behalf of the Experience team, the Division of Health System Strategy and Patient Experience, thank you, Nicki, Emma, and Richard, and to all of you who've joined us today. Thank you for everything that you do every day to elevate the experiences of our patients, their families, and carers. Have a beautiful day. It's not even afternoon yet, but have a beautiful remainder of the day, and thank you again for joining us.